first time, Sheffield Council's reached a compromise with campaigners who are fighting the felling of trees across the city. The council took court action against campaigners who had refused to sign up to an extension to an injunction designed to keep safety zones clear so felling work can restart. But after wrangling with the council, it's now been agreed a new injunction will last 18 months, not 3 years, and will allow peaceful protests as negotiated. The judge said defendants were justified in declining to sign the original proposal. Here's campaigner Calvin Payne.
We have seen in little over 24 hours what can be achieved. Unfortunately, they've spent a large amount of money to bring us here yesterday and today for something that we've been asking for literally years, that things are talked about. And it is a start. It is a start. I mean, we don't think there should be an injunction against what we do. There is. That's the way the law is. But if you compare what they wanted with what they've got, it's very different.
More on this story coming up with Howie in the next hour.
Just leave them alone, take your machines and go home, don't burn them down.
Stop the press. Sheffield City Council and the tree campaigners have reached a compromise. I don't really believe it, but what can this be about? Our political reporter Liz Roberts has been in court today and she can explain more for us. So what is the case all about then?
Well, if you remember last year, Sheffield City Council took out an injunction which prevented campaigners entering what they called safety zones around trees where work was due to be done. Now, that hasn't necessarily been that successful because the campaigners have still managed to protest. They've still managed to, in some cases, get within the barriers, which breaks the injunction. And that makes it essentially a criminal offence. It means that you can't go inside. But they're fairly complicated and it details what you can and can't do. Now, what the council wants to do is that's running out. And the council wanted to extend that injunction so that it could continue to do this tree felling work. Now, it wanted to extend it both in time and in remit, really, in what it was saying you could and couldn't do. So it was making things more restrictive for campaigners because it basically said that the campaigners have gone against the kind of feeling of what it was, of what the whole injunction, the spirit of the injunction, I think were the words they used. They said, you're going against the spirit of the injunction by finding loopholes that are still enabling you to prevent work being done. So it was trying to extend all of that. What's happened today was it sent letters out to a number of people, about a dozen letters, asking them to sign this or face court costs. So it identified individuals and said, we've identified you as essentially as sort of troublemakers, I suppose, as protesters. We want you to sign this undertaking, otherwise you'll face court costs. Now, protesters didn't sign those letters and they said, fine, take us to court. 4 of them specifically, Councillor Alison Teal, Calvin Payne, Paul Brook and Dave Dillner, they defended their position. So it was that was what this was all about, basically. Now, in the end, it never came to court, in essence, because they spent a lot of time in another room that wasn't the courtroom negotiating. And a deal was done. An out-of-court deal was done. And it basically changed the frames of reference within the injunction. So that's what they've spent a day and a bit, basically, discussing. So the campaigners are happy. Sheffield City Council seem happy. And what it means is that there's compromise on both sides, that work can still happen, but so can protest, so can peaceful protest. The judge said, well done, basically, well done for sitting down in a room and discussing this rather than it coming in front of a judge to decide upon. But he also said that the defendants, if you like, were eminently justified in refusing to sign the undertaking as was originally proposed. In other words, the fact that things have changed means that you were right not to, you were well within your rights not to sign that and to get it discussed. So let's listen to Paul Brook. He was one of the defendants.
It was badly worded, it was poorly written, it was over restrictive. What we've negotiated is something that's more of a balance. Our issue was that we should have been able to negotiate that without having to spend a fortune on lawyers. It wasn't our choice to take us to court. It was our choice not to sign something that was poor law in that sense, and we defended ourselves on that basis. They made a bad set of decisions trying to drag us into court on that basis. To be honest, we didn't have a choice. It may be that they've spent a lot of money, but for each of us there, we were facing bankruptcy. And that's something that you have to consider when you stand up to this case. They didn't have to incur this kind of money whatsoever. They didn't have to incur this money over the last 3 years taking us on and fighting us on the process. If they've now reached a position where they're saying that AMEY can adapt the specification and trees can be saved. We're talking about the last 300, and they're now saying that some of those trees don't need to be felled. Well, if they'd said that 3-4 years ago and re-looked at it and discussed with it, they wouldn't have had to spend a penny on legal fees, because we wouldn't have been standing under trees and we wouldn't have been protesting their poor actions and their bad choices and felling healthy trees. So yeah, I'm afraid they have brought the costs upon themselves.
Absolutely.
Our actions have been a reaction to their bad management of our city's trees.
So, Liz, what have the City Council had to say about this?
Well, the City Council have said today, yes, they've got this injunction in place again now, so that's their news. A further 18 months. They wanted it to be for 3 years, but that was one of the concessions. It's been reduced to 18 months. But Councillor Lewis Dagnall has also added that the council is currently preparing a compromise proposal for tree replacement work. You heard Paul Brook refer to it there. He says, which we look forward to soon discussing with residents, campaigners and other stakeholders. And the pause on tree replacement will remain in place until these discussions have concluded. So it seems as though the City Council is now trying to find a better way forward for the remaining trees that have been identified for felling. So maybe we are seeing a change in their approach here. This is Paul Pousland. He's the barrister that represented Calvin Payne today.
I think we've seen in this time the two different, the Jekyll and Hyde of Sheffield City Council, if I can put it like that. We've seen their bad old side of the council that continues to fight rather than compromise, that wastes tens of thousands of pounds of taxpayers' money unnecessarily, and that keeps taking the legal and the fighting route rather than the compromise route. But we've also seen cracks of light and hopes of progress here as well, because they have talked to us, they have compromised, and they're also talking, I believe, seriously about the need to actually properly compromise and mediate the dispute more generally. So we need to keep fighting them if they do plan to come back for more trees, but we also need to be open to this idea of progress, to settling matters and mediating it and trying to find a way forward that works for everyone.
So that's Paul Pousland, the barrister who's been helping some of the tree campaigners. Obviously, the next step then is to wait and see what this compromise deal is that the council is going to offer.
Liz, thank you. That's our political reporter, Liz Roberts.
Just leave them alone. Take your machines and go home. Don't burn them down.
Sheffield City Council's reached a compromise with campaigners fighting the felling of trees across the city. The council took court action against campaigners who'd refused to sign up to an extension to an injunction designed to keep safety zones clear so felling work can restart. But after wrangling with the council, it's now been agreed the new injunction will last 18 months, not 3 years, and will allow peaceful protest as negotiated. The judge said defendants were justified in declining to sign the original proposal. Here's campaigner Paul Brook.
The judge said at the end of it that we were eminently justified not to have signed that undertaking because it was badly worded, it was poorly written, it was over-restrictive. What we've negotiated is something that's more of a...
Just leave them alone. Take your machines and go home. Don't burn them down.
I wanted to talk to you about trees as well. We've got 2 minutes. Have we got time to do it justice, or do we find space later on in the show?
I can try and explain it as quickly as you like. Quite a big day yesterday. Yeah. A compromise was reached out of court. This was to do with the injunction that the City Council wanted to extend both in length of time and in remit. It wanted to tighten up what it thought were loopholes that the campaigners will manage to get around by squeezing themselves between fences and walls and geckoing, as it was called, and all that kind of thing. And in the end, they sat down for an entire day out of court and reached a compromise. So there is still an injunction. It's for 18 months, not 3 years, and it does allow peaceful protests that the campaigners wanted. And I think from their point of view, importantly, the judge said that they were justified in not signing the original undertaking. So it does seem as though we are seeing a shift now in the approach from Sheffield City Council.
What's interesting is that that meeting could have taken place in Tampa coffee shop and not in a high court, costing Sheffield City Council 75 grand.
This is the point that campaigners make, that they were wanting them to sit down and talk about it at a much earlier stage, and that it got to the point where it was in court, and then, they sat in a room outside of the courtroom and discussed it. And yes, from what we understand, the court costs of the City Council are around £75,000 for this latest court case. That doesn't include the previous ones that we've already had.
Who made the decision to take a piece of an injunction that the judge said was poorly thought out and poorly worded? Who decided that the 75 grand would get spent on that? And more importantly, of course, what the council quite like to say is each side's paying its own costs. Of course, the council isn't paying a single thing. Sheffield taxpayers are paying that.
Well, they are. It comes out of taxpayers' money, of course. Yeah,
it's really easy to play fast and loose with injunctions when you're paying from with other people's money.
Yeah, and this is the interesting point that the campaigners say. We are facing bankruptcy here. If we'd have had to have paid £75,000, that comes out of our pocket. Obviously, they're crowdfunding, but they haven't crowdfunded to the tune of £75,000. So a significant day on all sides yesterday for the campaigners, I think, particularly. But I think Sheffield City Council is also now saying, look, we are looking for a compromise. We're looking for the time when we don't need to have the injunction anymore. And that's what they seem to be working towards. They have now promised a compromise, a mediation, basically. So everything is still paused until what they are going to propose. We don't know what that is yet, and they're going to sit down with the campaigners and show them their compromise, and that's what we're waiting for next.
Down, 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 down. Don't touch them down, 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 down. Just leave them alone. Take your machines